let's talk about how I got started doing what I do. I started off as a musician in my very early teenage years. I was recording my band demos in the basement because I really didn't know better. I thought that's what all musicians did. I was a geeky guy that would rip apart record players and tape recorders. Was doing all of this technical stuff. I enjoyed technical technical approaches to things, and then mixing it with creative. As I got older, I was always doing demos for my bands, and I learned how to operate a full-size console. I just phoned a gentleman that sold these consoles in Canada, and he told me to come down and pick up the manuals. There was 2 manuals that were about the size of phone books, about 1,200 pages each or something. They were just huge books, and I read through all of these, both these books, and I memorized them. So I knew how to run this console virtually in my head, and then I would go to different studios, and I said, well, I have a band, and I want to record your band. And that's how I got into full-size studios and large-scale consoles. I had a band with James Labrie, who's a singer from Dream Theater now. We had a band together many years ago, and I was existing in those days by recording other bands, and then recording my own band, and that's how I was generating money. So what ended up happening is record companies would call me, and I was like, oh great, they want to sign my band. And they'd say, I would say, this is great, do you want to sign my band? They went, not really. But who recorded this? We really like this. And I said, well, I recorded it. And they said, well, we don't want to sign your band, but do you want to record this other band? And it started off being demos for record company, and then all of a sudden these demos, all of a sudden there were some projects that I did that were released to radio, and they were released as records. I was working with different artists, and all of a sudden I have songs that are sitting in top 5 on radio. You know, I don't feel like doing a band where I'm touring. I travel anyways when I work with bands. I go all over the world working with bands, so that is my way of touring. And to be honest with you, I prefer to be go to one country. I like to stay in one spot for, you know, whether it's 2 weeks, a month, or 2 months. It's for me, it's better rather than being in a different city every night and after 3 months not knowing where I am. I think any touring musician can empathize with, especially the singer when he says the name of the wrong city while he's on stage. So that's a good symptom to know that they have no idea where they are. So I don't really feel like, oh, I've given up my musician roots. I use them all the time. I use them for arranging when I'm working with bands. I do songwriting with bands still. I still play guitar on some records that I work on. I sing on some records that I work on. And so I really still have the creative outlet, and I get to apply the technical knowledge that I have to making records. I've been really, really fortunate to work with a lot of artists that are amazingly successful in their own careers. I've had a chance to work with Aerosmith. I've had a chance to work with Dream Theater, with Rush, with Mick Jagger, with Seal, Pink, like all of these artists that, you know, if you had asked me when I was 17 years old if I would be working with bands of this size, I would have just laughed. But I've been very, very fortunate and very blessed to work with artists of this stature. One of the really great things that I found about artists that have such a magnitude of success is that they are every bit like everybody else, you know. And sure, they've got the financial success that, you know, they have problems that are a little bit different, but they have the same family problems and the same physical things. They need the same attention as everybody else. And what I found is just treating them like anybody else, with respect, and to do a great job with them. And we always have fun. Every record that I work on, one of the major things that I emphasize is let's have fun. We're making music for a living. None of us have what I would say the day job. You know, we're not cleaning out the Slurpee machine at 7-Eleven for our job. So we're making music for a living, and we're having a great time doing it. And that's what I like to emphasize, and I think that the artists I work with, they respect that and they appreciate it. different albums, different artists, they have varying degrees of complexity on how they approach their music and how they want to hear themselves presented as far as their production. I've done records where we can finish the actual recording process in under 2 weeks. The longest record I've worked on was 11 months. And 11 months, that was something that there's orchestras involved, there's wanting to record in various studios around the country, and all this takes time to move around, tear stuff down, set it back up. The band settle back in. So the productions vary very widely. None of the projects has ever been, I've been really fortunate to not be involved in what I would say is a disaster. They've all been very, very good projects, and there's, you know, it's one of those things, if you have a 6 a.m. call that you have to fly across the country and record an orchestra, and you go, oh, I have to be up at 6 a.m., then you think of, you know, gee, I remember why I have to be up at 6 a.m., that's a pretty great thing. So, you know, really that feeling of it being a difficult time, it's not a difficult time, it's a really great time. I get hired to be a producer, a mixer, and sometimes an engineer only. For example, if I get hired as a mix engineer, the engineer has recorded the material. The producer has put his direction into the material already, and I get the artist's direction combined with the producer's direction, combined with the record company's direction. I'm basically, at that point, I'm the last stage prior to mastering. Assuming that I'm mixing a 12-song CD, my involvement is anywhere between 10 and 18 days. As a producer, the story's a little bit different. I'd like to think of myself as a temporary member of the band that comes in and offers ideas in order for the band to feel the best at what they do. We're in the process of recording or in the process of writing, and somebody presents a lyric, and I say, hey, you know what, maybe this word might be better suited, or maybe this approach to the vocal might be better suited, or we change the arrangement. The artists that I work with, they have this feeling that, you know what, he's just doing this to make, this discussion is to improve the song and to improve everything. It's a positive thing, and it's not judgmental. It's impersonal. It's not judgmental. It's not saying, hey, this word is a terrible word. It's like, why don't we use this, and these are the reasons. Ultimately, it's the artist's decision because it's their band. Most of the work that I do is mixing. Mixing is the process of taking the music that's already recorded and then forming it into the final product. And a lot of times, if I do production, I'm usually engineering, and I usually mix the project as well. You know, a lot of people ask me about, you know, what my approach is to engineering. There's a bunch of technical knowledge. I used to read all sorts of handbooks on phase and distortion and all sorts of really geeky, long-haired stuff. But the really important thing is that when I engineer, I do stuff that impacts me emotionally. My approach to engineering is very tactile, and it's very, it's emotional. That's the best word to explain it. Case in point, I had a very, when I was starting off in my recording career, I had a very famous producer come in. He just came in to say hi, and he was looking at some of the meters on the console, and he tapped on the compressor meter, and he went, you know, and it was moving quite a bit because we were recording something that I thought compression sounded really good, and he said, well, that doesn't look quite right, does it? And he walked out, and I was devastated. I was like, what am I doing wrong? It sounded good. Advance 5 years, and I had quite a bit of music on the radio and quite a bit of music that was selling, and I ran into him at the same studio. And he said, hey mate, you know that compressor thing you were doing, can you show that to me? Right? And this is how it changes, that actually engineering is very relative, and it's very much like playing an instrument, that your approach to it is creative. You might do something that's not what you'd say is an industry standard, and what starts off as being such an odd thing to do might become an industry standard. Just as a quick example, you could have somebody that's recording drums, And if you look, there's a lot of studio sessions you'll see where there's a speaker in front of the kick drum, right? Because one guy years ago put a speaker in front, because a speaker, when you run it backwards, acts as a microphone, and that's what gives you all the low end in kick drums, right? For these modern rock kick drums. And this guy, who was, and I don't know who it was, but the first guy that did that, can you imagine? He's got a speaker sitting in front of the kick drum. Somebody went, "Are you a crazy man?" And now, if you anything you see, any studio session you see, you're going to see these the kick drum with a speaker in front is very, very common. So that's what I'm saying, how standards change all the time relative to people trying to be innovative from a technical point of view. I'm outside the studio. And go out for lunch and go to a restaurant and there's music playing. What happens to me when I hear music in the restaurant? Well, what happens to me is as much as I try to avoid this, I automatically go into evaluation mode, and my ears pick up all sorts of stuff. Whether I can hear the vocal, whether this, whether that, my ears always do this. And it's, for me, it's I guess what I'd say, an unfortunate byproduct of what I do for a living. For me, it's a difficult thing to turn off, and I'll listen to song arrangement, song structure, vocals, like all this stuff is going through my head while I'm eating my lunch. So I think it's just there for good. So what types of music do I listen to? I have basically two different fields of music that I listen to. I'll listen to music from a production standpoint, and then if I'm not listening to music that's work-related, I like to listen to songwriting music, songwriters' music. I would listen to music that is, from a production point of view, it's often related to the type of band that I'm working with at the time. So if I'm working with a metal band, I'll be listening to metal music, progressive music, and I'll stay within the genre just so that I'm in tune all the time with it. From a songwriting point of view, I'll listen to a lot of Beatles, I'll listen to Elton John, soft music, but the thing is Beatles say were fantastic innovators at songwriting. They knew how to write really well-crafted songs. And I think that that's an ongoing educational process, and there's stuff that, I mean, I've been listening to Beatles since I was very small, and this is music that I still discover new things in. For me, I have a few records that I found were really pinnacle, cutting edge for their time. Say Metallica, the Metallica Black record, which by today's standards might not be a super heavy record, but it was one of the first records where everything was like super hyped up, and that went to propel the artist. Bob Rock, who I'm a big fan of his production work, he also worked with Motley Crue, and as much as Dr. Feelgood was a good record, the record after that with another singer named John Corabi, that record for me was their quintessential record, in that not as commercial as Dr. Feelgood, but just the sound of it. It was so big and so heavy at the time. Another producer and mixer, Ben Grossi, he's kind of taken that sort of current position in music, and he's done artists like Red and Disturbed and tons of different artists, and I find that his production and mixing work really touches me. I just finished recording the fourth album for a Madrid-based band called Eldorado. I first worked with them in 2007. They were a cold call. They contacted me in Canada because of the history I had working with another Spanish band in 1997. And they enjoyed the production work on that album, and they had contacted me about working on the record. Let's talk about the studio. For this, for the fourth Eldorado album, we recorded at a studio called Musicgramma. The main reason that we use that studio is they have a Neve 80 series console. I usually record on a Neve console. Just the idea of sounding classic but really big, I think that we got some really, really great classic sounds. Let's talk about cameras. Do I like having cameras around all the time? This is something that's really changed over the years, where fans essentially heard a press announcement that the band's going into the studio, and X amount of time later there's another press release saying the record is done, and there's the record release date, and that was it. And now every step of the way there are cameras. I think the cameras that are there to historically capture an event, I think that that's great. For Rush's Clockwork Angels, we had cameras that were static cameras that were stationed in every room, and any room you walked into, there were cameras. I think as long as they're used in that capacity and they capture the creative process, I think that they're fantastic. Once I'm finished the Eldorado record, that'll be mastered, sent to the artist, and I've been in touch with John Petrucci, who has been threatening to do a solo record now for, I don't know, I guess 4 or 5 years now, but we're actually getting very close to doing that, and I start a new Dream Theater album at the top of next year, which would take me into mid-2015.